Good evening and welcome to the School of Exercise Science, Physical and Health Education's Landsdowne lecture series. We're absolutely thrilled that we have Dr. Richard Tinning joining us for a stay at the University of Victoria. Just a couple of comments about Richard before I turn the podium over to him. Richard's a professor of pedagogy and physical education at the University of Queensland in Australia. But he somehow negotiated a dual job in New Zealand, as if Australia isn't good enough. But he's also a professor of physical education at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. So he is skipping back and forth between Australia and New Zealand currently. To give you an idea of Richard's prominence in this field, he's received many honors and awards, and I'll just cite 4 or 5 of them to give you an idea of how well he is regarded. AERA, the American Educational Research Association, is one of the most prestigious research organizations in education, and Richard had the distinction of being recognized as a Scholar Award last year in 2011. He is an internationally recognized President's Prize winner from ACEP and the IOC for his contributions to physical education and sport research. He has a number of fellowships that he has received, and he's an honorary fellow of physical education in New Zealand. He received that award in 2009. He's an international fellow of the American Academy of Kinesiology and Physical Education, an award he received in 2007. And he's also a fellow of the Australian Council for Health, Physical Education and Recreation, which he received in 1991. All that to suggest is Richard has established himself as a very, very well-renowned scholar. He's been a prolific researcher as well. As those of us in the university community know, one doesn't do research on the cheap. One needs to obtain some funds in order to carry on one's scholarly work. And I was just doing a quick sum of the grants that Richard has accrued over his tenure as a university professor, and it's just over $1 million that you've racked up in research grants, so congratulations on that. Richard's also a renowned speaker. He's had keynote addresses at 32 international and national conferences. He's the author of 12 books, 78 articles that have been published in major scholarly journals around the world, numerous book chapters, and close to 50 other conference presentations. So he must know how to talk in order to write up those credentials. In short, Richard, you are a tremendous contributor to our physical education pedagogy area, and we are very grateful that you agreed to come and join us, and we look forward to your presentation tonight. So please join me in welcoming Richard Tinning.
Well, good afternoon. Just get myself sorted out here. Have a little sip of water to begin. Okay, firstly, thank you for coming out. You should be all at the beach. We're doing something in your shorts in this beautiful day, but it's fantastic to be here. Thank you, Rick, for your introduction, and thank you specifically to Tim Hopper and the Marquis of Landsdowne for making this visit and this lecture happen. It's a special privilege for me to share my meditation with you today, and the fact that you might think you're a small audience. Those of you who are academic know that sometimes we fly around the world for a conference and we get 10 or 15 minutes to talk to half a dozen people. So this is not a problem at all. Just a bit of background, my connection to UVic, some of you don't know, but it started many years ago when I read a small book on teaching effectiveness by one of your colleagues here, Bruce Howe. And I believe it was with John McLeish. I don't know whether he was in physical education or in the faculty of ed in general. But it was an important book on sort of academic learning time and so forth in those days. Now, at that stage, I was at the Ohio State University as a doctoral student, where I met Mary O'Sullivan. And Mary had done her master's degree here sometime before at UVic. And after graduating from Ohio State, Mary came here on the faculty for 2 years in 83, 84, something like that. So that's a connection. And then more recently, I discovered that one of my colleagues in the University of Auckland has his master's degree from UVic as well. That's Ben Dyson. Okay, so that's the background. And I hope you can see the slides, and hopefully they'll be enough to keep you awake in this little meditation. In this lecture, I want to trace two historical trajectories: the history of physical education as a school subject, and the history of physical education as an academic study at university. I'll then argue that there is now a disjunction between the two, and that this has serious implications for the training of physical education teachers. The extent that this story resonates with your world here in Canada, I'll leave it for you to judge. Now, physical education is an almost universal experience for kids in schools from Canada to Korea, the Ukraine to the UK, Australia to Argentina, and Norway to New Zealand. Moreover, in all of these countries, and many more, there is physical education as a field of study at university. In order to understand this phenomenon, we need to backtrack. Whatever its characteristics, as I suggested in my title, while some love PE, others loathe it. And I want you to know that I understand that physical education makes friends and enemies of people. Now, this is captured nicely in the words written inside the dust cover of English author Julie Mayeson's wonderful little book, Not a Games Person. It suggests that PE is one of life's great levelers, a uniquely ruthless aspect of school experience which shapes us all and leaves its traces in unexpected and lingering ways. A little closer to home was this account in the CBC News from 2009. Some Canadians may be haunted by memories of being whipped by dodgeballs in elementary school, not being fit enough to play midfield in soccer, or watching as all your classmates were picked ahead of you for whatever game was the focus of the week's gym class. Unpleasant memories of phys ed can turn Canadians of all ages off exercise and sport. So much of what I say tonight will be already understood by my colleagues in physical education. Perhaps they will excuse me if I take this opportunity to talk more to those and about those for whom physical education was something to be endured, maybe, or perhaps evaded at all costs. I do not wish to change, even if I could, your loving or loathing of physical education, but hopefully I can illuminate some of the particular issues and influences on what stands for phys ed in schools and in our universities, and why it matters. Physical education is an idea that has been around for a long time. In ancient Greece, for example, according to McNeely and Wolverton, physical education was as important as, if not more so, than mental training. Maybe that's not much of a recommendation given the current circumstances of the Greek nation state. In this brief, simplistic and linear history, I want to pick up the story not quite back in ancient Greece, but only over the last 150 years, essentially since the latter part of the Industrial Revolution. Underpinning these, the forms of physical education that have emerged over the past 150 years are certain circulating discourses. Since the 1850s, there have been three main discourses that have shaped the nature of physical education, namely health, nationalism in all its forms, and more recently sport. Now, while there are specific differences between the evolution of physical education in Britain, the USA, Canada and Europe, in essence we see these same discourses in one form or another across all countries. The privileging of any particular discourse depends on the prevailing context. Given the limited time of this presentation, I'll focus only on the health discourses, but obviously they are often interrelated. And in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Rapid urbanisation associated with industrialisation gave rise to deplorable living standards with attendant health problems in major cities across Britain and the US in particular. And during this period, according to historian Roberta Park, physical education was a topic of interest to an impressive number of educators, social reformers and medical doctors. They were also joined by many politicians, some physical culturists, like this sort of guy, who advocated for physical activity with the intent to improve individual living conditions, health and well-being. As this photo from a Manchester school circa 1920 reveals, physical education was a new site for the control and regulation of young bodies, and a very important one. Now, about this time, Swede Per Henrik Lind developed a system of freestanding, systematised exercises designed to regulate the body in particular ways. They're based on medico-scientific principles of the late 19th century. Swedish gymnastics, as it became known, was particularly popular across Scandinavian countries and also in England. At about that time, another form of systematic body training was German gymnastics. Using particular apparatus, this form of physical education evolved into what we now know as artistic gymnastics. It was quite popular in many schools up until quite recently, and it certainly represented a major part of the physical education experience I had when I was a secondary school student in Australia. Around the 1950s, however, an English female physical educator by the name of Irene Marsh had a different idea of physical education. She developed a form of physical education that was inspired not by scientific principles of body development, but rather by child-centred educational philosophy. She was a Rousseauian Emile fan. Sometimes also called movement education, educational gymnastics offered a challenge to the more teacher-directed pedagogies of Swedish and German gymnastics. However, the challenge was short-lived, and after a brief period of popularity, predominantly with female physical educators, but maybe with Rick and a few others who had trained it around that time, educational gymnastics was designated to history. By the early 1960s, the popularity of gymnastics was largely over. It was replaced by a form of physical activity we know as sport. The idea of physical education as gymnastics was replaced by the idea of physical education as sport. Indeed, for the second half of the 20th century, sport-based physical education became the dominant model throughout the world. It's what comes to mind for most people when they even think of PE. More recently, however, in what we might think of the shallow end of the 21st century, we have seen health discourses again define the idea of physical education in many countries. Indeed, from the early 1990s in New Zealand and Australia, physical education does not exist as a separate school subject, at least in the compulsory years of schooling. Physical education is now part of the Health and Physical Education, or HPE, learning area, and it combines physical education, health education and home economics. I'll use this Australian and New Zealand example quite a bit throughout this, and it may be different. I know you have physical and health education, I think, here in BC. While health and physical education are combined as a curriculum area in many countries, it is also true that physical education still exists as a separate subject in many and perhaps most countries of the world. In this regard, I'll continue to use the term PE, or physical education teacher, recognising that in some countries they are actually health and phys ed teachers. Okay, what is most interesting about the New Zealand health and physical education curriculum is its conceptual orientation. I need to explain this conceptualisation briefly because it's central to the argument I'm making about the disjunction between the school subject and physical education as an academic subject. The New Zealand Health and Physical Education curriculum seeks to make a significant contribution to the well-being of students beyond the classroom. And according to the New Zealand Ministry of Education, health and physical education is about developing the knowledge, skills and attitudes and motivation to make informed decisions and to act in ways that contribute to personal well-being, the well-being of other people and that of society as a whole. Indeed, that's a very big chart. Now, there are four underlying and interdependent concepts at the heart of this learning area, health and physical education. And they are these. First, Heora. It's a Māori philosophy of well-being. This unique Māori philosophy entails spiritual well-being, mental and emotional well-being, physical well-being, and social well-being. Now, I don't know whether you have anything like this in relation to your First Nation involvement in your curriculum here. Certainly in Australia, we have no such connection with our Indigenous folk. But in New Zealand, the Māori culture is fairly strong, and it's represented in the health and physical education document, especially through that concept of Heora. Attitudes and values signifies a positive, responsible attitude on the part of students to their own well-being, respect, care and concern for other people and the environment, and a sense of social justice. And I'll come back to that point in a moment. A socio-ecological perspective is a way of viewing and understanding the interrelationships that exist between individuals, societies and others and society. And finally, health promotion refers to a process that helps to develop and maintain supportive physical and emotional environments, and that involves students in personal and collective action. Students in health and physical education cover 7 diverse learning areas organised across 4 strands, and these are they: personal health and physical development, movement concepts and motor skills, relationships with other people, healthy communities and environments. Now, significantly, the new health and physical education in New Zealand offers a social view of health inspired by the World Health Organisation's Ottawa Charter in 1986, and is conceived as a socially critical curriculum. The socially critical orientation is perhaps rather unique in Australia and New Zealand, and is underpinned by critical theory discourse and education for social change. Importantly, this conceptualisation offers a considerable challenge to those physical educators who continue to see sport as the meaning of physical education, or think of health mainly as an individual responsibility and in terms of biology and physical fitness. Now, while the new health and phys ed curriculum offers new opportunities for physical education and health, it also presents significant challenges. One major challenge stems from the nature of physical education as an academic subject. Accordingly, I'll now turn my attention to a brief history of physical education as an academic subject at university. In what follows, I'll briefly consider the developments of physical education within the American university system. Developments in universities in the UK, in Europe, Scandinavia had their own pathways. New Zealand and Australia have been influenced primarily by developments in the USA and the UK in particular, and I think that's probably the case also for Canada, but you can be the judge of that. Interestingly, the concern with the health of individuals and society that was central to the development of school physical education in the late 19th century was also central to the evolution of physical education as a field of study at universities. As I mentioned earlier, at the time, physical education was a topic of considerable interest to many educators, social reformers and medical doctors. And indeed, one such medico was Dr. Dudley Sargent, who in 1879 was appointed Director of Physical Education at Harvard's Hemingway Gymnasium. Many of you probably didn't even know that Harvard had physical education at the time. Now, these initiatives at Harvard, however, were not academic. Rather, they were explicitly to improve the health of undergraduate men. What if the women, you ask? Don't you get? Of course you do. Well, young women at the time attended what was called the Harvard Annex, which was not constitutionally part of Harvard College. who came after university. They were, however, allowed free access to Dr. Sargent's private gymnasium, located nearby in Cambridge. That's another story. While Sargent was looking after physical education for men at Harvard, things were also happening up the West Coast. The example of the University of California at Berkeley is instructive in this regard to the development of physical education as a practical activity for undergraduate students and the training of physical education teachers for schools. So here's what happened at Berkeley. In 1886, the Academic Senate decreed that all undergraduates during their first 2.5 years would be required to take 5.5 hours per week of active exercise. Imagine how well that would go over now. In 1888, a Department of Physical Culture was established with Frank Payne, MD, as director. He was responsible for the oversight of the required program of physical activity police, and for giving each man a medical examination and for providing lectures in physiology and hygiene. In 1890, Luther Gulick, a medical graduate of NYU, declared physical education to be a new profession, involving for its fullest appreciation a profound knowledge of man through physiology, anatomy, psychology, history and philosophy. And these subjects became the core of Berkeley's BA major in physical education at the time. Now in 1917, California made physical education a compulsory requirement for all public schools. It was the first American state to do so, and as a consequence, the demand for trained phys ed teachers increased greatly. I read that physical education became a compulsory subject in schools in Western Canada in 1922. So similar trends were happening beyond the USA. Now this resulted in a proliferation of physical education in American universities. By 1941, there were 56 universities and colleges across the US offering degree programs in physical education. Most degree programs were located in faculties of education. And after World War II, the demand for trained phys ed teachers continued to grow, and by the 1960s, physical education in universities was predominantly for the training of PE teachers. Now, by this time, the training of teachers in general had become an issue in the US and all over the US. And in 1963, James Conant, a chemist by training and former president of Harvard University, published the results of his 2-year study of teacher training in all school subjects. The Education of American Teachers painted an unflattering picture of what then stood for the training of teachers in the US. Conant considered that the training necessary for a teacher of music, art, foreign language and physical education was different to that needed for other school subjects. He acknowledged that physical education was, at that time, a school subject with a performance base. Improvement of motor competence through activity was considered to be the only subject matter of physical education, and teacher training was based on developing a motor skill competence in prospective teachers. It was also the case in Australia at that time, maybe it was for Canada as well. Conant argued that, quote, a satisfactory teacher of music, art or physical education must be a competent performer, unquote. However, the development of such competencies should not be part of the teacher education program. In his view, in all these fields, the development of a certain degree of competency should be a prerequisite for admission into a teacher training program. Conant's recommendations raised fundamental questions regarding the nature of the body of knowledge that should represent the academic study of physical education. It represented a serious challenge to what stood for physical education in American universities and colleges at the time. Now, whereas a teacher of physics, chemistry, maths, history or geography, according to Conant, should have a degree in the relevant discipline area and then proceed to teacher training. For physical education, also music and art, Conant recommended a 4-year degree, with half of the time of the degree taken with general education. We'd probably think of that as subject matter content knowledge, to use Schulman's language, and the rest with practice in teaching and some courses in educational psychology, philosophy or history, or sociology of education. He was not explicit regarding what general education for physical education was, but he did name anatomy, kinesiology, physiology of exercise, and health and hygiene as typical. Now, the year after Conant's bombshell, Franklin Henry, a physical educator at UC Berkeley, with a research interest in the psychology of motor learning, responded to Conant with his paper entitled Physical Education and Academic Discipline. In that paper, Henry countered Conant's conclusion that the field of physical education subject matter was limited to physical skills and applied techniques. Henry recognised that physical education had the dubious distinction of being a school subject for which colleges and universities prepare teachers, but do not recognise as a subject matter field. However, he contended that the theoretical and scholarly subject matter did exist in physical education, quite apart from the mission of teaching physical education in educational institutions. Over the next 10 years, some physical educators responded to this situation by developing academic specialisms that were collectively to constitute physical education as an academic discipline. And these specialisms were exercise physiology, motor learning, sports psychology, motor development, and history and philosophy of physical education. Typically, as a consequence of their changed academic focus, these departments adopted new names that reflected changes in curriculum and funding, and also they sought greater academic status than was the case with physical education through a change in name. In universities across the world, we now find departments with names such as kinesiology, exercise science, health and sports science, kinesiology and human kinetics, human movement studies, exercise science, health and physical education, and many more variations. Whereas the early departments of PE were located in faculties of education, many of the newly named departments were now located in faculties of science or health science. A comparison of UVic, the University of Queensland and the University of Auckland reveals this trend. At UVic, for example, we have a School of Exercise Science, Health and Physical Education located in the Faculty of Education. At the University of Queensland, where I work, we have a School of Human Movement Studies located in the Faculty of Health Science. It was previously in the Faculty of Education and shifted. And at Auckland, they have a School of Sport and Exercise Science located in the Faculty of Science. Now, in Australia and New Zealand at least, the cold hard fact is that there is considerably more funding available for research relating to movement and physical activity and health than there is to sport and education. Another factor in the trend to changing the department's names was an explicit move to distance themselves from PE teaching and education. This scenario, in which the new exercise and sports science is separated from physical education and from education, is played out in many universities across many countries. As I claimed at the beginning, the historical trajectories of school PE and physical education as an academic subject has reached a point of disjunction. And this disjunction has serious implications for the preparation of physical education teachers. Now again, I don't know whether that's the case here. I find it encouraging that your department is still within a faculty of education, but you will be the judge for such matters. Let's consider for a moment the typical pathways to becoming a health and physical education teacher or a PE teacher in Australia and New Zealand. Basically, you can have a 4-year concurrent or dual degree for example, a bachelor education in physical education, or in Auckland's case, a Bachelor of Physical Education, which is 4 years. And you can have a 3-year content degree and a 1-year diploma of teaching. And the typical combination might be a Bachelor of Exercise Science, 3-year degree, and a 1-year diploma of teaching to go and become a phys ed teacher. In the New Zealand context in particular, there is increasing political pressure to move towards a 3+1 model for reasons that are more to do with funding than intellectual coherence or anything else. An ongoing question is really the question that Connor made. What is the subject matter content knowledge, or general education in Connor's terms, that is needed for teaching physical education or health and phys ed? In this regard, we must remember that the contemporary health and phys ed teachers in New Zealand, at least, are supposed to help young people make healthy choices regarding lifestyle practices, what sort of things to choose. Think for a moment of the contemporary concerns over childhood obesity. There are many physical educators and public health advocates who believe that school physical education should be a key site for ameliorating the so-called obesity epidemic. Indeed, obesity is often seen to be a problem of poor lifestyle choice, and PE teachers are called on to help young people make the right lifestyle choices regarding exercise and diet. In New Zealand, Australia and elsewhere, we need to ask whether a typical exercise science or kinesiology degree provides future PE teachers with the necessary knowledge to do this sort of health work. In my view, it does not. The typical exercise science degree develops and reinforces a bioscience view of the body. The dominant metaphor is the body as a machine. Now, considering this knowledge paradigm, obesity is simply a thermodynamics issue. Too much energy in, calories, too little energy out, exercise. Such a view of the body ignores, or at least marginalises, the social, emotional and cultural aspects of obesity. Sorry, I got too far. Okay. And it certainly is not very helpful in understanding a social view of health, or at least in New Zealand context, a culturally related concept like aorta. The obesity crisis and health more generally are very complex phenomena, and the contribution of exercise science needs to be considered in the context of the influence of other cultural players and discourses. So, this is a little my attempt to represent some of those other cultural players and discourses. And we have issues like the media and advertising in general, organised sport, health promotion, school PE, the notion of risk society, which is a term used to try and understand how everything now in our culture or in our society is focused on risk and how we can ameliorate or reduce risk, healthy risk and so forth. The concept of neoliberalism, which is a thing that is known in the US as neoconservatism, but we experience as an increased responsibility of the individual, an increased accountability, and other matters relating to personal health and choice. So we have culture and ethnicity, we have politics and economics. All these things are playing out in how we need to understand something like childhood obesity. It's not that simple. So, exercise science is not alone the answer. A contemporary physical education teacher needs to understand the body, both in nature as a bioscience concept and in culture as a socio-cultural construct. In this regard, bioscience knowledge is important, but it is insufficient to understand the complex biosocial phenomena, such as health. Significantly, it's also insufficient to understand complex socio-cultural activities such as sport. Sport is physical, biophysical, but it's also socio-cultural. And to understand it and its place in our culture and so forth, we need broader perspectives than is often available through a typical exercise science degree. There is another consequence of an emphasis on science that can be problematic. It concerns what sociologist John Law called the cleave to order and a certain general seeking of certainty. Students schooled in anatomy, exercise physiology, biomechanics seem to seek certainty. They prefer facts and black and white answers, and are often uncomfortable with the ambiguity in questions without simple answers. However, if they want to be physical education teachers, they must eventually work in schools with children and youth who are both biological and social beings, who live in both nature and culture simultaneously, and for whom the most pressing issues often relate to the personal and the social. In this context, the science-based knowledge and their quest for certainty will often let them down. Zygmunt Bauman's words are pertinent in this regard. He suggests that if they, our students, expect to find a cohesive and coherent structure in the mangle of contingent events, they are in for costly errors and painful frustrations. If the habits acquired in the course of training prompt them to seek such cohesive and coherent structures and make their actions dependent on finding them, they are in real trouble. Now, at this point, I need to emphasise that I am not for 1 minute anti-science. Indeed, I am often inspired by science and certainly loved the courses I did in exercise science when I was an undergraduate student. I also know that many of my colleagues in exercise science make genuinely worthwhile contributions to understanding human movement and its relations to health and the world. Science is, however, only one way to understand physical activity, the body and health. Now, as I mentioned earlier, another expectation of the new health and physical education curriculum in New Zealand and Australia is that teachers should facilitate a socially critical understanding of physical activity, the body and health. The content orientation of a typical exercise science degree does not provide such a perspective. It's important to understand that the critical thinking that is learned in science is not the same as socially critical thinking. One could reasonably expect that the discourses relating to a socially critical perspective on the body, on physical activity and on health will be more likely to be engaged in and through such disciplines as sociology, history, cultural studies, history and philosophy of science, feminist studies, anthropology, or medical sociology. Importantly, there is little, if any, engagement with such disciplines within a typical exercise science degree. So in my view, while the morphing of physical education as an academic field of study into exercise and sport science has been largely successful in terms of legitimating the academic study of human movement in universities, the downside is that it's become less relevant as a subject matter for the teaching of health and physical education. For example, a degree in science, for example, would not be considered as an appropriate training for a history teacher. Nor would a degree in linguistics be appropriate training for a chemistry teacher. In this regard, I think it's time to think again as to the appropriate content degree for teachers of health and physical education. Sip of water. Okay, in drawing this meditation to an end, I want to suggest that PE has often been troubled with its marginal status in education because it is seen to sit on the wrong side of false dualisms. Dualism of play and work, the dualism of practice and theory, and the dualism of mind and body. These are deep structural prejudices in our education system and in our society. While mind-body dualism may have become a more widespread, taken for granted since the Enlightenment, the other dualisms go back even earlier. This is a long time to embed such prejudice in cultural practice. The New Zealand curriculum allows us to think beyond the dualisms, but in practice, they are not easily overcome. Health and physical education advocates, health and physical education curriculum advocates more holistic and embodied approaches to physical activity, the body and health. But the success in creating a genuine educative experience of such holism is, in my view, marginal at best. There is a long way to go. These false dualisms play out in a number of trends that can be problematic in our field. One trend is making school PE more academic. In New Zealand and Australia, students can study physical education as a senior school subject for university entrance. Senior PE as an academic subject is an academic subject, and contains little practical physical activity. Now, while the creation of PE as an academic subject has been successful in regards to the senior physical education, I have concerns regarding its trend to have a more academic focus in the compulsory years of secondary school. As Jane Kenway and Elizabeth Bullen claim in their challenging book, Consuming Children, Education, Entertainment and Advertising, many young people are turned off the sort of learning that they associate with school. They see schools, teachers and parents as representing the real, read dull, boring, controlling, from which they seek to escape. Physical education, as movement and play, has the potential to offer young people a space different from the real of the classroom and from a reliance on written and technological mediated literacies. We should not forget that it is physical activity that is the unique aspect of physical education. It is also a feature central to the reason why many young people choose to become physical education teachers. The late Australian educator Garth Boomer once claimed that teachers teach who they are. It was a deceptively insightful observation. PE teachers, whether in Sweden, the UK, Canada or New Zealand, have been found to have relatively similar discursive histories with respect to the central place that physical activity, sport and the body plays in their identity construction. Maintaining a physically active lifestyle is central to the identity of many physical education teachers. To a certain extent, their identity as physical education teachers is based on their embodied identities as practical doers, as physical activity seekers. A career in physical education or health and phys ed is often seen as a way to continue to be involved in the things they enjoy doing. It is compatible with their developing sporting habitus. And this was certainly the case for me, and probably for many physical educators in this room. While recognising that physical education can make enemies, it is also worth remembering that as physically active play, physical education can be very pleasurable for many young people. Many young people, and adults alike, find pleasure when they run, when they swim, when they climb, when they hit a ball. And participation in movement for young people can develop movement competence, which in turn can be important social capital for many young people. Such social capital might be different in different parts of town, different countries, but its importance can be significant in identity making. Now, I've gone on record in other places as arguing that maybe our new curriculum, health and physical education curriculum in New Zealand and Australia, tries to do too much to justify its place in the school curriculum. In the process, its unique contribution to education of young people might be diminished. It seems to me that school physical education must execute a delicate balancing act between mimicking academically focused subjects with all its attendance status and academic benefits, and emphasising its unique contributions to the education of young people, contributions that too often fall on the wrong side of the value dualisms. You might remember that the subtitle of this lecture was A Meditation on Education, Physical Activity, the Body and Health. Physical education in both schools and universities has always been concerned with physical activity, the body and health. Emphasis may have changed over the years, and as certain agendas drive policy and practice, but the interconnection between the three elements has always been present. No other field of study has this particular focus. And as educators, I think it is worth our understanding the implications of the growing disjunction between school PE and physical education as an academic study at university. I hope this meditation has helped you to better understand the reasons why. Thank you for listening.
Perhaps we can just open it up to the floor for some comments, questions?
Yes, indeed.
From those.
I wasn't coming.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
The answer is 7.
So where do you see us in 10 years' time as a profession? Or 20?
Maybe a little more confused. I did find it interesting how this department is still in education here, and I think that's the case in a number of places across Canada. The drift towards other spaces, other faculties, is an issue in Australia at least, and in New Zealand, where the dominant discourses about physical education become science rather than education. We also have a number of, many of our faculty back home come from disciplines that have got nothing to do with what we would think as the basis of physical education. We have engineers who come in and do biomechanics. We have experimental psychologists who come and work in motor control and so forth. Excellent scholars doing amazing work, but they don't connect with where the fields come from. So my view is the issue is, again, what sort of understandings, ways of knowing physical activity, the body and health, should our students who go out as professionals in that field come in touch with, be exposed to. And I think there is a danger with a narrowing of a curriculum in some places because of that. We need to talk about it. The University of Queensland is a little bit unusual in the sense that we have an education degree in our department, which is in health science. It's the only one in the university. And we've hung on to that for historical reasons. But it at least enables us to have a little bit of discussion with our colleagues who are running the other disciplines. So, where will we be in 10 years? My sense is that matters of economy and academic credibility and so forth will drive a further disjunction, a further wedge. The challenge is to try and keep some discussion across that. Yes, wait.
I'm interested in the dualism you mentioned. So you also mentioned that you are doing something that can help you to overcome that dualism. So could you please give us an example of what kind of a trial that you do, or how you're going to overcome this dualism between practice and then theory, body and mind?
What I said was that the curriculum that's been developed in New Zealand in particular has the potential for those sorts of learning experiences, but most of the time it's not met. There are some teachers who have got a good sense of how to make things interconnected with their emotional lives, their physical lives, their social lives and so forth, and to make a more holistic experience. But there are many teachers who just see physical education as going out and practicing soccer drills or whatever, without the connection to those drills. What do those drills mean in the lives of young people? What does it feel like to be involved in that? What does it give them access to in relation to working with their peer groups in the street or in community clubs, and so on and so forth. So it's a matter of helping our teachers understand that a holistic involvement in this thing called physical activity will be about the body, will be about health, and should be about community as well. So there will be teachers from New Zealand who could probably give you some examples of what they try to do to demonstrate that. But it's early days, and it requires quite a bit of thought and information sharing and professional development workshops and so forth to get those sorts of experiences. Yes?
Thanks very much for your outlining of the two poles, I guess. And it's really interesting because I'm outside of physical education. Just always trying to figure out, well, how's kinesiology? What do they do? I'm wondering if there's, because I understand it, you're saying that there's, in terms of people who become teachers of phys ed, you could come at it through taking a content area, and then a year to get your diploma as a teacher. Or you could do a concurrent degree, and I'm assuming there would be some pedagogy in that.
Yes, it could.
Is there any response from the field in saying, oh, we really prefer these professionals because they've got the content area? Or, no, we want is there any, does that have anything to do with the direction that schools take?
You would like to think it would. This is anecdotal. There are many schools who would say I would prefer a concurrent 4-year trained graduate than one that's done an end on 1 year on top of an exercise science degree. Many schools would say that. But the government policy doesn't hear that. It's got other agendas to push. But also, there are, once those teachers, and this is a conundrum I've had, and there, for some teachers, even with a 3+1, and even a heavily science-oriented undergraduate degree, working in schools with the curriculum and with other teachers, maybe within 3 or 4 years, you wouldn't know the difference anyway. So there are issues there. And I think that I'm always claiming that the greatest thing we can do for our teachers in their training, whether it's 3 years +1 or concurrent or 5 years as it is here with a combined degree, is to get them to think. Now, it sounds trivial, but it's to think about these sorts of issues, to think about physical activity in a broader way than just the body as a machine and how you can analyse it and so forth. And that, getting them to think about education and social change, how they can make impact on the lives of young people and so forth, that's the greatest thing we can give them. It doesn't matter whether they've got the knowledge for everything at day one, but if they've got the inspiration to think about their subject, then they can find the resources and things in their practice. So it's a long answer to the policy. The policy is going one way, what practice says would be another, but somewhere in the middle, my hope is that if we get the right sort of experience for undergraduates in general, it can play out in better teaching. Yes?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, with the suggested initiatives that you're trying to do in your environment, how would you monitor the impact of those initiatives in making the separation a lesser gap?
Look, typically the way we do these sorts of things is to try to get some research money so that we can attract some students and find out some of those answers to those sorts of questions. But we already do know a bit about the disjunction that we've been able to register through some of our research. For example, that our students prefer the science-based subjects because of their certainty compared with the sociology and those sort of things, which is, they think, vague and a bit uncertain. So we know a few of those things already. But in terms of tracking the sort of issues that were mentioned in relation to four-year programs and concurrent programs and so on, again, we would need research funding to do it, and that's not easy to get.
And you hope the impact will be creating individuals or helping individuals to make better health choices.
Well, the way these things feed back is we might think, well, if we do the research and then we publish the research and we write a report, that the government will read that and that will inform their policy. That's, I suppose, the idea. But there's a lot of slippage in that. So there are lots of problems in translating what you might find in research, best practice, into policy that can be enacted. So you haven't got much control over some of those things. Now, Sam and then Catherine, I think. Do you want to say something?
You mentioned how some teachers try to make a holistic connection between physical activity, community, body health, and some are concerned still with just, say, improving sports skills or whatever.
Yep.
I was just wondering if you have any ideas for how new teachers with no seniority, sometimes still looking for full-time jobs, can kind of challenge the curriculum when half of the information is being drilled into our head to kind of comply with the majority and to go along with what each district and school is doing.
Yeah.
So as a new teacher, you're kind of being told by, well, and either I learned the whole holistic thing, but I will go into a district and I'm told follow what they're doing.
Yeah. This is always the problem. I mean, the teacher educators have called the wash out effect of what happens when you're in university, when you get out to schools and so forth. Others talk about the reality of schools and the artificiality of the university context. But essentially, all young teachers will go into an environment where there's a lot of micropolitics, power, all sorts of stuff going on, and it's hard to negotiate that. Some young teachers go down without trace. Others live long enough in the system to maybe get a voice and be able to do what they need to do. But the field is littered with examples of young enthusiastic teachers going out and being, if you like, squashed by the head of department or the school district that don't do it that way. The best hook is like in the New Zealand curriculum, which is now different, and you should be able to expect, thank you, you should be able to expect to see that curriculum enacted in schools. And eventually you may, but at the moment there are still pockets or schools where they're still doing the same old stuff and they can get away with it.
Yeah, it just strikes me that, some of our, in our context, some of our best prepared teachers in physical education are for the older students. And at the younger ages, they don't necessarily have a background in physical education.
Do you mean teaching with
Teaching
high school
with elementary
teachers?
and secondary. And it seems to me, in looking at some of your pictures and whatnot, that it's really critical that we get that pleasure that you were talking about at an early age for everybody in some way. So I'm wondering about your experience in New Zealand and Australia, if it's similar, or if your elementary teachers are better prepared as physical education teachers.
Yeah, the answer is no, they're not, for all sorts of reasons, a crowded curriculum, stuff like that. We don't have a teacher-coach role conflict like you have as much in North America. So the teacher in a high school would be there for teaching physical education, geography, or whatever the second subject is, and not typically employed as a coach as well. How do I get to that? Right. Thank you. My preference would be to move all the teachers of physical education out of the upper secondary and put them into junior, to elementary school and junior high, full stop. All the resources. It's crazy. Most of the resources are in the middle school and the senior school in Australia and New Zealand. And indeed, there's a lot of status involved in teaching senior physical education within the school. I can understand all that. But if you wanted to make a difference to the way kids experienced physical education, you'd be better off to have those people in primary schools. Because most primary schools in Australia have generalist teachers, not physical education specialists. They're not staffed for physical education specialists, because the resources, given a pool of money in the pie of national budget, go into schools, and part of it goes into physical education, and most of that goes into secondary school. So it is a bit weird, but...
I would just like to comment on what you said. I totally agree. I teach in elementary school. I've been teaching for 30 years. I was trained in primary, but PE is my passion. I just didn't go through for PE.
Yeah.
I think it is tragic that children in elementary school do not have a PE specialist. It just doesn't happen. We have prep time, and as a staff, we vote to have our prep time go to PE, then whoever sort of has those PE skills takes that over. It doesn't happen very often. And I also see that that's where you need to start. You need to start in primary, in elementary, to instill the passion, to get kids jazzed, the pleasure, the health, the holistic. Now, I am an anomaly. I do PE 5 days a week. I get it first thing in the morning. I always grab those times, and I do it between 45 minutes and an hour. And my kids academically soar. They love school. I love PE. I do classroom PE things, but I also run the track and field program when the season comes. And I do a badminton club for parents and kids, just to get them active. It's part of, we talked about the academics that it should rain on, right? But I think it's a tragedy that people are trained up here and come up with these wonderful skills, you're enthusiastic, everybody's young. I mean, I speed opera, right? And there's no jobs in elementary. You are a classroom teacher, and we're actually allowed 2 half-hour blocks a week for PE. That is. But it's the reality. I find there's a huge gap between what goes on up here. And I take student teachers every year because I love being a student teacher many years ago. I just love the energy. But there's a huge gap between what's being taught up here and what the reality is in the classroom. And it's getting worse.
And that's true
everywhere.
My country as well. Yeah. But there are some exceptions. I can think of a few schools that I've been to, some in the US, some in Australia, where there is a specialist and there is valued within the school, and there is a tradition of involvement, and things work very differently. But it's so idiosyncratic as to who is the teacher, what their enthusiasm is. If they leave, it's gone.
I think pendulum's going to swing back, actually. I'm very optimistic about that. I just don't think it's there right now.
That's because you're an optimistic person.
I tried. I didn't think it's going to go back.
Richard, perhaps just a couple of comments. The battle to retain our 5-year B.Ed program in physical education and teacher preparation was waged back in the early 90s, and the majority of subjects, at least at the secondary level, went to a post-degree model within our faculty. So you had a community history degree or biology degree, and you take a post-degree teacher education.
And those degrees are 40 years in, correct?
Correct, yeah. And then there's the 50 year for the teacher education part. We in the school fought tooth and nail to retain our 5-year orientation teacher preparation. So in that way, we are somewhat unique, although there are other 5-year programs across Canada. What is more startling, and I think supports your comments earlier about this shift of physical education into a more academically oriented subject area, being called whatever it may be called, kinesiology, human studies, and the research dollars that are supporting those sub-disciplines have had a dramatic negative effect on the number of faculty appointments that had traditionally been in pedagogy in physical education, that have been lost due to the excitement and the economic support, if you wish, of those other areas. Tim and some of our faculty go to our annual phys ed conferences, and they're shocked at the number of institutions. There's only one person delivering the physical education preparation in their institution. We have the luxury of having four of us still contributing in that field. So it's had repercussions as far as the amount of support in terms of faculty positions across this country. So it's a real concern. I think the comment about specialists and generalists delivering elementary school physical education, you captured the BC situation, but there are provinces in Canada where there are mandated phys ed specialists delivering the elementary school curriculum. BC just unfortunately isn't one of them. So I hope to retain the optimism that maybe we can get back to those days, because we used to have a number of school districts with specialists at the elementary level, but it's gone a long time ago.
I'm just wondering again, I mean, you know, my background's not in education, but when you're setting up a training program where it's a 3-year and a 1-year, or as in here it's a 4-year and a 1-year, are you not almost setting up a situation where teaching is kind of an afterthought, where you know you go to get your degree in whatever, it would be chemistry or PE or sports, and the additional tag on of the teaching years is kind of a, well, again, like an afterthought. If the pedagogy is not incorporated throughout the whole process, and you kind of decide at the end to take your skills and I'll teach.
There are a lot of examples. A couple going on in Australia at the moment, in the United States, American teachers or something like that. We've got an Australian equivalent where the government have put a lot of money into saying they want the best teachers, the brightest teachers, right? So they said, well, we'll offer you a 6-week course. Once you've finished your degree, we'll take the brightest kids from a chemistry degree or whatever, and we'll give you 6 weeks, and then we'll put you into the toughest school district. This is the rationale. Say, well, if you're really enthusiastic and you're good, then you'll be able to help these people in this difficult area to love and learn the subject. And well, they get spat out, of course. They don't last very long. But a lot of people in high places still believe that really a good undergraduate degree, a good knowledge of the subject, is really all you need to teach. And all the other stuff that you go on at universities is really just a Johnny-come-lately add-on.
Because it seems like if you were entering a program with the intention of inevitably teaching at the end of it, you would take that idea through all of your classes and you'd be connecting and you'd be thinking about application, all that throughout the whole 4-year process, even if it wasn't a specific component, right? Whereas otherwise you're going through the whole 4 years without that thought process and then trying to make all those connections in a really short amount of time.
Yeah, it is a difficult issue.
There may be one pendulum swing that would change that. If you actually did an education degree, it's not for school, it's about education, it's about learning, about adult learners, about population learning, and did that as a 3 or 4-year degree with a content area as a specialization, then went into an active degree for schools. I think what Holly's referring to would be the ideal, because you may not want to go to school, you might want to go into a different career where those skills would be applied. But really what we need is the skills of creating better learning environments for humans should become more of a core that leads to different professions, of which a major one is teaching. Of that, in this case, is it?
One of the problems that we have, of course, is that everybody's been to school. A lot of people have been to university, so they think they know how to do it. They've been in there, they've done, 15,000 hours of apprenticeship. They know what to do. Is that all?
There's probably a lot of personal dialogue that could carry on, but I think in lieu of reality, we'll call it to meeting. Richard, your comments tonight have been timely in that the province of BC is undertaking a review of our provincial physical education curriculum. we need to figure out some of the answers for our teachers who are teaching physical education in our schools, I think, to reflect more of what you've presented tonight than what has traditionally gone on in our programs. And I think there are some lighthouse teachers in our district who share your concerns. So thank you on behalf of the school for your timely comments. I hope it infiltrates the thinking and discussions that take place over the next year or so within the province. So on behalf of all of us, thank you.